Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is John. This report is for the 4th of August. Well, continue to plop up in a interesting trade. For the most part, was straight up, and it just kept going. Nothing super duper from an impetus standpoint. We just have been having just a gentle rise of midterm buyers in green, as well as red maintaining at zero, and shorts just pretty much flatline. It's been pretty consistent with the power two ever since the buy cross back over here. So not a whole lot has changed from that. Again, we were always watching for the increase in the shakeup because we've been having rising gold, rising Azure, but they started to flatten out. So it was to keep an eye on that because you're going to get more fluctuation back and forth. And of course, the NASDAQ, though, like we said before, was in a much stronger position, even though producing similar results. Cyan well under red, as well as green, red above zero, so all of the indicators of strength. And we talked about this the other day, is that when you start to see that breakaway spike, that's usually an impetus for a strong move to the upside from it. Last time we saw it, well, it was right over here where they met, and then boom, we ended up with the rise before it rolled over later, but much nicer shakeout from a NASDAQ standpoint. So it's clear that the NQ Tech has been the one delivering all of the strength so far. From a Euro standpoint, it's interesting because, nothing in the real world suggests that the Euro should be making this move, because if you looked at the GDP numbers that came out for US as well as Europe, the US did remarkably better than Europe did. So the fact that you had this massive rise in the euro is strictly central bank activity. It just lets you know that they had a desire to improve trade for the U.S. as well as does help transfer rate-wise for S&P companies. And they didn't like the lowered euro when we were getting below that 110. Every time we got near 105, there was a strong defense by central banks to push the euro back up. And it's strange because the euro, I think, is going to continue to suffer record low GDP numbers comparative to what may happen in the U.S. Of course, the U.S. is real dependent upon how much paranoia the virus spreads, as well as which states lock down. And again, this gets back to that problem with this disproportionate opening without everybody doing it equally. You're getting a fractured America that is 50 individual states, not one union, and you're not going to have an effective economy under that. And oil's reflecting that, plain and simple. Plain and simple. So that leaves a refuge of gold for everybody else who is terrified that the collapse is imminent. I can assure you the collapse is not imminent, because the U.S. still has to spend nearly $1.8 trillion in cash they had, because they underestimated the early returns that they would get, and they ended up getting too much cash. So they've got a lot of extra to burn. But of course, Congress can't agree on anything, and it's just going to sit around, which does nobody, including the economy, any good, because there are people that desperately need some assistance if you're going to force them into these austere conditions. And from an intraday standpoint, kind of fun. We scroll back here to the beginning of the day. We started out kind of modest flat, had a little bit of weakness, but then we turned it around with cyan under red, always a buy. That's why it's the little cyan color. And then boom, we took off, and as we got to the highs, it just gave us little sell signals in between. I was taking those. I'm trying to remember where I was at with my, as I slide forward here, I got in on this setup drop down below. I think it was right around 84. Yeah. And next dip. So filling in, let it dip below the red line. It was right back over here. That sort of completed that. We also had a series of positive extremes that began, but those had been filled earlier. The next set of positive extremes, though, goes back right about here to the 68 range. Maybe we should put a line right there, because that is a good place to expect a little bit of activity. And we like to make those magenta so that we know that what we're talking about is positive extremes. Yes, we could do red, but I like to use red for an actual sell signal. The magenta just shows up nicely, and it's a good color. So that's the only reason we selected it for that. So I'll be looking for interesting move right around that spot to see what we get as far as activity goes. But all in all, we're at 3274. We just got shy of 3300. This is that, just like we talked about it when we were back at, 1200, I was talking about 2000 plus 2200, and it's just a slow, methodical march, and there's no valuation that justifies this as much as the radical devaluation of the US dollar is really what's going to drive this, because they're not going to take a discount on the value of their businesses, and that's where the market multiple changes. You have to understand that in order to be okay, because the reality is, if you're trading actively, it doesn't really matter what the number of the market is in general, as long as you have the signals. It becomes just a denotation, that's all. So, as always though, anything new and unique, I will certainly put up on the Skype chat. I think we have below here the other Power Mode 2 buy signal chart that I'm working with. So it entered back from here, gave a brief sell right there, and I'm still working on putting in the different sell configurations. So where those magentas came in, we would get a trigger, and when that does that though, there'll probably be an increased number of buys at some of these baselines that correspond to the crossover. So it'll just add to the number of signals, but then we can hone in from there. So having a good buy signal is just as, a good sell signal is just as important as a buy signal. You gotta have both, because you can trail, of course, with our ABMs. I don't have the ABM on here. I was experimenting with the long-short algo as a criteria for it, so we'll see if it's able to follow. And just because I'm looking for something that will give us the broadest ability to capture the longest runs while still being flexible enough to not give away too much, so that you don't have drawdown from peak. As always though, trade well. We'll talk to you later.